What an amazing day of conversations and content. I hope you agree. I'm honored to have spent time with Ambassador Samantha Power and appreciate her leading her powerful voice to our grassroots efforts. I wish her all the best with her upcoming endeavors. As a proud feminist, I got so much energy from our Power of She conversation. As Chelsea said, the pandemic has impacted women and girls exponentially. The work of leaders like Adua, Winnie, and Bianca is essential as we rebuild together. Winnie's honesty is a brave inspiration to us all. I am all of you, Winnie. Thank you, Adua, Bianca, and Winnie, for sharing your stories and your work with us. And thank you to my friend Chelsea for leading that important conversation. We will be digging further into the power of she through some of our collaborative workshops. So if you haven't signed up yet, please do so via the chat at the end of the day. Wow, the spotlights. Our spotlights are designed to show you the innovations coming out of our communities on the ground. The Safety City app could be used all around the world. What an impressive innovation. How cool was the community art we saw from all over the world? The impact that communicating through art has on our communities is huge. I encourage you to share pictures and comments on your event digital wall, our version of a community mural. Our other big conversation of the day showed us how community leaders have worked to mobilize during pandemic. The impressive results show us that communities hold the power to mobilize. Eugene, Nse, and Nelly are on the front lines, driving that impact, amazing grassroots leaders. And thank you to my friend Cecile for leading that conversation. My friends Nick Kristof of the New York Times and Adrian Poe, the co-founder and executive director of the National Domestic Workers Alliance, are going to join me now for a conversation to close out the day one. Following our conversation, if you've signed up to one of our important collaborative workshops, click the join button you will see on your screen. If you haven't, please sign up in the chat. And you will help us drive output that will be passed to the Global Alliance for Communities, ensuring that we take the conversation forward in tangible ways. Okay, on that note, we'll see some quick questions pop up on the right side of your screen. Please take a second to answer them for us, as your input is very important. Okay, let me welcome Nick and Ojen. Conversation with Nick and will be interesting. I want to say that thank you for both of us for joining us today. Nick, you have been a dear friend of mine for many years, and your work at the New York Times covering human rights, women's rights and health, and the global affairs has been highlighted some of the most challenging issues around the world. Your work is really special, and I'm so glad you are here with me today. Agent, you know that very well. I'm a huge fan of your work with the National Domestic Workers Alliance and how you are bringing more attention to care workers. I also love your humility. You have cracked the code on raising the voices of underrepresented groups. So having you both with me for a closing reflection on day one is amazing.
Well, I'm honored to be here to chat with you both. I'm a huge admirer of the work that both Kennedy and IGen have done in helping support overlooked groups around the world. And let me maybe start with that. Kennedy, I'm in Oregon right now. Oregon sends its love to Matare and to Nairobi. But how has the pandemic affected the communities that you work with? I'm from the U.S. Frankly, it looks like overlooked groups around the world have become more overlooked, at least from within the U.S. Is that true, or what has the impact of the pandemic been?
Nick, I was so angry when the expert says that COVID is equalizer. I think they are wrong. It is not. Nick, as you know, we already have inequality existing. And they are being hit with this pandemic, something they don't understand. So in my community where I grew up, and these places whereby people survive through hand to mouth, no health insurance, no double rooms, no fridge where you can keep your food. And then, Nick, you are told like social distancing, wear mask. It was really tough because it was really whereby somebody has to choose between buying $1 mask, it was by then, or buying food. So Nick, I met this woman who told me, Kennedy, I'd rather die from corona than to die from hunger. You see, so it really put, so Nick, to answer the question in short is that it has made the situation even much worse. Yes.
I remember quoting you at that point, at some point over the last year in the New York Times about your point about choosing to die from coronavirus versus from hunger. It's a truly terrible Hobson's choice. Ai-jen, let me ask about the impact of the pandemic on the groups that you work with. On the one hand, it seems to me that in the US, there has been more sort of recognition about some workers being essential, and those aren't the investment bankers. On the other hand, obviously the gaps in income, in mortality have been greater than ever. And so how has the pandemic net affected the groups you work with?
Well, Nick, first, it's great to be in conversation with the two of you. Kennedy, thank you so much for your leadership. It is an inspiration, and these conversations today are so essential. So just thank you. And also thank you, Nick, for the stories you've been telling through the pandemic. It is a huge reason why I do feel hopeful that more people understand the realities of inequality in our world that have been so exacerbated by the pandemic. And I'll just say that going into the pandemic, domestic workers many were already struggling to survive, not unlike the situation that Kennedy describes, where you had people working for poverty wages, already struggling to put food on the table, no job security, no health care, no sick days. And as soon as the stay-at-home orders came down, you saw dramatic losses in jobs and income, to the point where the second week of shutdown, our members were telling us that they were not sure where they were going to get money to put food on the table for their own children. At the same time, we had domestic workers who were working as essential workers on the front lines of the pandemic, making sure that the elderly and people with disabilities were safe in their homes. And meanwhile, their own children were home from school, struggling with online learning and trying to figure out, do I risk my own family's safety and my own safety to continue to work so that I can put food on the table? What are my choices? It was immediately a crisis of impossible choices. And now, even as some people have gone back to work, we're still looking at a 40% unemployment rate. So it is a full-blown depression for domestic workers, and for those who are undocumented in particular, there has been no relief for a year. So it is dire, and at the same time, I will agree that more people are attuned to just how much work in our economy was invisible and undervalued and insecure. And I do think that that is the greatest opening to create change for low-wage workers and the working poor of decades.
And Ai-jen, to follow up on that, I have the sense that in the last year, among some of these low-income workers, that there have been all kinds of increases in problems that we've been largely unaware of because there hasn't been so much visibility, because kids haven't been going to school, because they've been getting fewer doctor's visits. And that it's not as if things can snap back immediately when people return to work, that there will be long-term consequences in we've heard about increases in addiction in some communities, children who've been more traumatized, obviously the malnutrition issues you talked about. Is there a lot going on that we're not seeing that we will pay the price for years to come?
Yes, and I do believe that so much depends on our approach to economic recovery and truly recovery in a holistic sense from this pandemic. And if we look at the multiple dimensions of the crisis, it is a public health crisis. It's also a racial and gender equity crisis and an economic crisis, and the three are woven together. And if we imagine our boldest, bravest strategy for recovery, it is one that has to fundamentally address the inequities that made us so vulnerable to begin with and put marginalized communities at the forefront of how we design our recovery. How do we invest in jobs for vulnerable workers, in raising wages, in expanding our safety net to truly keep everyone safe? These are choices that need to be made in governing out of this pandemic that can have a huge impact in minimizing the threats and the risks that you just named.
Kennedy, as you look back on this year, what are the lessons learned from the pandemic and the pandemic response that can guide us in normal times in terms of elevating some of these voices, elevating some of these issues, getting resources to address these kinds of inequities around the world?
Yes, Nick, if I'm being honest with you, is that people tend not to learn well. Nick, you are much involved with Ebola. So what happened? And I thought the world will be able to learn from there. If you look at it now, Nick, what's happening with this disease, with this virus, and hearing that Canada, developed country, are just choking the vaccine, the vaccine. And people are so proud about America reaching 100 million. It's okay. But they're forgetting that we are in this together. If Kibera is not safe, America is not safe. If developing countries are not getting these vaccines, UK is not safe. So I don't know if we're learning from this, you know what I mean? But it's something that as somebody like you can really raise this issue up, because you can vaccine everyone in America, but this is, in Kenya, for example, Nick, this thing is mutating, it's changing, the different variants coming up, So I feel like we're not learning sometimes, But what I've seen is the power of the community, resiliency, that nothing really put them down. They keep on jumping up. So what they're looking for is just a little of a hand to hold them, the policy, to hold them back. You know what I mean? So that's how I feel. But I'm really worried with what's happening around the world, how developing countries are becoming selfish. I want them to think something called Ubuntu. You are in because of me. We are in together. Anyway, that's my message, Nick.
And, Ijen, is that your sense too, that the once trouble hit the developed world kind of pulled up the drawbridges and looked inward, and that it's been harder to build this kind of international solidarity precisely when it is most needed?
I would say it depends on where you are looking at the picture from, because I know, for example, within the domestic workers movement, which is growing globally, there was an immediate attempt to coordinate and to support each other's efforts. There are domestic workers who are organizing in over 60 countries around the world and have been working together since 2010. And it is a growing movement, and the sense of solidarity and connection and interdependence there is profound. In the domestic workers movement here in the United States, a lot of people thought that the pandemic would prevent people from getting involved in activism or advocacy, but that it's been the opposite. In fact, our meetings are better attended than ever. Our membership has grown. People are finding strength and resilience in community. And you're seeing beautiful volunteer efforts, like a group of nanny employers in Los Angeles who formed a Vaccine Angels group to help domestic workers get vaccinated as a volunteer group. So everywhere you look in the community, there is, I think, initiative and a desire to reach out and to express the interdependence that Kennedy described. And we have to invest in that and support that also with our policy and the way that we govern. And I think to do that globally is a challenge, but one that we must meet.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned some of that resilience and strength, because I think, we in journalism, frankly, we so often jump up and down about the problems that we don't adequately acknowledge, a backdrop of hope. And so, Kennedy, let me ask about that. Now, you're speaking from Matare, a slum in Nairobi that has enormous problems. So if you go 100 yards in any direction from where you are right now, what will you find? And not just the problems, what will you find that will give us some sense of that hope, that resilience, that strength that you mentioned?
Yes, Nick. So if I move from this room now, a few yards from here, I will meet women selling vegetables by the roadside. And they're telling you that there's nothing that can stop them. This is really powerful. And what is happening is that the policies that are there don't support them. They have proven that they can survive. And if they can get really friendly policies that care about their small businesses, they can rise. And it's amazing, seeing this. Nothing really puts them down. They keep on rising up. And I get the energy from them when I see them, when I see children playing here, when I see women. And honestly, why I'm really talking to Agent is really powerful, because most of the women in this community are domestic workers. And what I'm happening here is that there's this mentality that now virus is only in the slums. So what does that mean? They don't get jobs anymore. Because here we are not yet vaccinated. We just started it. So it means they're really going through a lot, but they never gave up. So, Agent, I'm so inspired by your story of the domestic workers. So I think they're also here, and they're doing it here informally. They may not have a platform, but they know each other. I remember my mom was a domestic worker and could tell a neighbor, where I'm working, they need somebody, please, can we go together with you? So it's just amazing to see how people in the marginalized community are not giving up, and they're striving up every day.
I would just add to that, I think that this era it is true that our realities are defined oftentimes by inequity and injustice, but our communities will never be defined by those realities. Our communities are always going to be resilient and strong and organize and assert their dignity and their agency. And that is, I think, our hope for the future.
And I think one of the things that each of you has done really well is to empower people, to ensure that agency is filled. And Kennedy had said that you would crack the code on that. Well, Kennedy, you cracked the code on that as well. I think how much Kibera has changed since I first visited Kibera School for Girls a zillion years ago. So there are a lot of folks watching who would like to replicate what each of you has done in some other part of the world. And I'm curious if you could each just give us some lessons learned about how you did crack that code, how you did help support the agency of communities that were neglected or overlooked. Maybe Kennedy, why don't we start with you?
Yes, thank you. I think one thing that Agent will agree, many things, but one thing I know we can agree together is that it was not easy to be where we are. And it was our life experience, what we've seen. And when we kind of made it, we realized that, what? It's not about us. These things are happening. We have to organize our communities. We have to bring these issues up. So like my story, growing up in Kibera slum and starting Shofco as a grassroots movement, there was no funding. I didn't understand how to do the proposal writing. I don't understand to speak their language. You know what I mean? And then, Nick, that's why I'm really doing this conference today, this event, to bring the voices of people on the ground who are really struggling and doing amazing work and are not getting enough funding or visibility. So And the power for me, Nick, is you can't do anything alone. You need a family. You need a community. When you raise the issue and people join that issues, you see you can't stop the light that's already started moving. I mean, so I feel like the power of believing in people is what really was able to propel us up. I mean, I knew that I can't do it myself. I need communities. And when I did with Shofco, I realized there are many Shofcos around the world that are struggling. So the point is that how can we do them together? That's why we have what's called World Community Forum that is launching Global Alliance for the Communities.
And Ijen, what was your secret to cracking that code?
Oh, there's no secret. It's just people. And for me, I've always really believed in the power of women. Women who power so much in our lives and in our communities, and yet whose work and contributions have been so undervalued. The act of bringing power and dignity and respect to the lives and the contributions of women is transformative. And the operating word here, just to build off of what Kennedy said, to me is power. That what we ultimately need to do to create change is to put more power in the hands of everyday people to both shape conditions of their lives and to shape the course of history. And I do believe that in the end, it's everyday people coming together in community, organizing, and their everyday acts of courage that do change the course of history.
I would just note that I've seen a lot of initiatives that have worked and some that have not worked. And one of the characteristics of those that have not succeeded is often they're organized by a bunch of really smart people at a conference room in Washington somewhere. And they don't work because they don't have buy-in. They're not inclusive. It's a bunch of really smart people who are trying to solve a problem somewhere else. And however bright they may be, however well-informed, it's an approach that I think has largely failed over time. And I think both of you, represent a different approach, and one that I hugely admire. And so with that, thank you so much to both of you for your insights. Thanks to all of you who have joined us in this conversation. And Kennedy, I'd like to turn it back over to you to finish wrapping up.
Thank you so much, Nick. And one thing I want to talk about you quickly is that you are one of the most brave person people don't know. You are one of the brave. You go to places that are difficult. You're not scared. So you are an amazing man. And thank you so much, Nick. And Agent, thanks for joining us. So today we have lifted the voices of community leaders and their solutions onto a global stage, as we discussed. We are shining a light on what is possible when you let communities drive their agenda. The success of a great reset after the pandemic hinges on the leadership of community-based practitioners, those who are on the ground, and they are systematically locked out from policy and funding decisions. That has to change. So today and tomorrow, we are advancing towards the goal of ensuring that the voices of community leaders are heard and able to shape the global agenda. I hope to see you all here tomorrow. And I'm honored to be joined by Edgar Villanueva, the renowned expert on social justice philanthropy and author of Decolonizing Wealth. I love that book. That will happen on day 2. To open day 2. We'll have more community spotlights showcasing innovative and impactful solutions. You will get to see an inspiring community health worker, a University of Community Development, and more. We'll also have more big conversations. Darren Walker, president of the Ford Foundation, is joining me and 2 other leaders, Dr. Fala and Glennis, to discuss how we build for a more equitable future. Again, Dr. Obi Ezekwesili leads a conversation with 3 outstanding grassroots voices. That's my friend for many years in Madare called George Gachie and Innocent Magavi and Dr. Bakteri focus on how communities and their leaderships are key to the post-pandemic economic recovery. To wrap day 2, I will be joined by Cheryl Dorsey, a trailblazer in the social entrepreneurship movement and president of Econ Green. We've been working together to ensure the momentum we have created today and tomorrow will continue. And last but not least, we have more collaborative workshops. I hope you are joining a workshop today. Coming up next, you can click on the link in the chat to join. I want to say again, I'm so excited to see you all tomorrow. Thank you.